The Razorbacks had one of the best pitching staffs in the country last year, led by the best pitcher in the country in Hagen Smith, but they might be better on the mound in 2025. We're going to go piece by piece and break down that claim, as well as talking about some of the closing options for the Hogs on today's episode of the Locked On Razorbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So as someone who covers Arkansas sports for a living, football, basketball, baseball, and even some others here and there, I really appreciate with baseball that I kind of know what I'm working with for the most part. Like all the time, people will be like, hey, how does the team look this year? They look good. We got some hitters. Yeah, they've got hitters. Do we have enough pitching? Yeah, they've got enough pitching. All these answers are very easy, but at the same time, I don't want my job to be that simple of just, yeah, they're going to be good. Don't worry about it. And so you've probably heard, if you're a fan of Arkansas baseball, which if you're listening to this, I would assume you are, you've probably heard some people make the case of like, hey, Hagen Smith was really good. And even though Arkansas might not have a pitcher as good as Hagen Smith, the staff top to bottom, this might be the deepest staff they have. And, you know, God bless Dave Van Horn. Hopefully he doesn't say that publicly, because every time he does, it seems to be like the kiss of death, reverse jinx. But, you know, realistically, though, every single year you look at Arkansas's roster, they're loaded. On paper, they should have a very good pitching staff. Last year was no exception. This year's no exception. It'll be the same next year. But I really wanted to, on today's show, to go kind of piece by piece and really look at, you know, who Arkansas's top guy was, you know, who's going to fill what roles, and kind of who's projected to fill that role in 2025, and sort of compare and contrast how we feel about the pieces on this year's team compared to maybe how we felt going into last year, and how it played out, of course. And I want to be as fair as I can. So, you know, bear with me. I'm going to just start at the top with Hagen Smith. So last year, obviously, Hagen Smith was the surefire starter, the number one ace on Arkansas's pitching staff. He was coming off of a year where he threw 71 and 2/3 innings, had 109 strikeouts, 42 walks, and a 3.64 ERA. We all kind of assumed he would take another step, which I think that would be an understatement based on what he did. He finishes with 84 innings pitched, 161 strikeouts, 34 walks, and a 2.04 ERA. So he had an all-SEC pitcher turn into an all-American pitcher. Look, again, I don't think Arkansas is going to have a pitcher as good as Hagen Smith for a very long time. I'm just simply pointing it out because we're going piece by piece. That's what we're doing here. And filling that role this year, at least in terms of where we stand now, would be Gabe Gackle, who, again, is coming off of a year where he had 42 and 2/3 innings, 57 strikeouts, 19 walks, 2.32 ERA. So really, you can make like if you really wanted to, like try and talk yourself in and be a sunshine pumper, you could say, well, Gabe Gackle's numbers as a freshman were just as good, if not better, than Hagen's as a sophomore. I don't know if I would necessarily make that argument, because Hagen as a sophomore was, you know, starting games, closing games, was an all-SEC guy on the same team as Paul Skeen. So he was a lot more proven, a lot more accomplished, and frankly had started games this time last year. And so I would give him the nod over Gackle. And again, I said I don't think Arkansas is going to have a pitcher as good as Hagen Smith for a while. I am not predicting for you that Gabe Gackle is going to be as good as Hagen Smith was last year as the ace. I don't think I'm breaking any news by saying that either. But if you just look at it, that's kind of where it stands. So you would give the edge, if we're doing this piece by piece, you would give the edge to last year's team. I think we can go ahead and confirm Arkansas will not have an ace better than Hagen Smith this spring. But moving on down the line, you know, you go to the next two starters. So coming into last year, Arkansas had Brady Tigert and Mason Molina projected to fill those roles, which they did for most of the year, about 80, 85, 90% of the year, some injuries mixed in there. But if you look at it, Brady Tigert was coming off a year where he threw 25 and a third innings, 31 strikeouts, 8 walks, 3.20 ERA. Now, of course, he was banged up during that season, missed a good portion of his sophomore season, came back, and that's actually when he first got moved to a starting role. And I believe the most he threw in a game as a sophomore was 5 innings. Had a few like 3-4 inning starts. They started to ramp him up towards the end of the year. But again, was not super proven as a starting pitcher. Now, let's be honest. We all, and I say we, me, you, everyone, we expected Brady Tigert to be really good last year. So I don't want to have like a revisionist history where I look at it and I'm like, Brady Tigert had only thrown 25 innings. Of course he wasn't a great starting pitcher last year. Like, look at Zach Root, who is, I would say, projected to be Arkansas's number 2 starter, coming off what he did at ECU: 68 innings pitched, 76 strikeouts, 3.56 ERA, more proven as a starter. You could argue better stuff as well, which actually might has a legitimate 4-pitch mix, 93, 94 from the left side. So look, there's a very real case to be made, and this is where you can start to argue with your buddies, where I think Arkansas is better equipped to have a well-rounded rotation with guys like Root, guys like Landon Beidelshees. But I also do not want to overlook the fact that this time last year, you and I both thought Brady Tiger was going to be good. We also thought Mason Molina, who was coming off of 83 innings, 108 strikeouts, a 3.67 ERA, he was a very accomplished starting pitcher. In fact, if we're just going by their resumes going into the year, I think there's a very easy case to be made that Mason Molina, coming into Arkansas from Texas Tech, was more accomplished than any of these pieces we're talking about. Like, he was a quote unquote safer bet to be pretty good. Again, he got banged up during his time at Arkansas. It didn't necessarily work out the way we thought it would. He finished with a 4.47 ERA, only threw 58 innings for Arkansas. So with those two guys, Tiger and Molina, who we all kind of penciled in to be really good, turned out to not be as good as planned. Things did not go as planned. Injuries played a very real role in that. I believe Tiger wasn't even available for the NCAA tournament. But you get 59 innings out of Tiger, 58 out of Mason Molina. So before I want to try and preface this and word this carefully, I think Arkansas will get more out of their number 2 and out of their number 3 starters this year in Zach Root and Landon Beidelshees, or Gage Wood if it ends up being him, whatever the case may be. I think Arkansas is actually going to have a more well-rounded number 1, number 2, and number 3 overall. Again, I don't think Gabe's going to be as good as Hagen Smith was, but I think he's going to be pretty good. And I think the two guys behind him, you could actually make an argument, are qualified to be aces, are qualified to be front line of your rotation type of guys. But again, I'm putting the asterisks, the disqualifier there, that we thought Mason Molina and Brady Tiger were going to be really good. So that just is a lesson that you can't just look at it on paper and be like, okay, this guy did X in 2023, Y in 2024, so he's going to do Z in 2025. Doesn't always work that way. But again, we're just talking kind of on paper. What do we expect from these guys? How do we think it's going to play out? And look, we are going to go to the bullpen and kind of talk about some of these pieces as well. Continue to do what we're doing now after one quick break. Hey, Razorback fans, it is time to recognize our Roy Player of the Week. So far this season, we've pulled over $20,000 to support players on Roy. Micro deposits lead to massive change. With the Roy app, you can directly support your favorite student athletes you love, ensuring that all funds go to the specific player you choose. Unlike collectives, you know exactly where your support is going, and you even receive exclusive content like personal videos and updates after the season. The best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver the content, you get your money back. This week, I will be supporting Andrew Armstrong, who we should be supporting every week. Might be the only hog that truly deserves it on the football team these days. But I just pitched in $100, and I'd love for you to join me. Even $10 makes a difference. So let's show Andrew Armstrong, a damn good hog, the love he deserves, and keep him connected to our school. Remember, pay today, celebrate tomorrow. Your support sets your team up for success. Plus, don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. Win 2 tickets to a game in November. Just download Roy, create an account, and enter referral code Locked On, and you're entered. Again, download Roy now. Join the NIL game with no subscriptions, no fees, and be sure to check him out on Instagram, Facebook, and X. That is Roy, meaning return on you. Okay, so moving on just a little bit here. We talked about the starting rotation, which I think everyone views it kind of the same. We all think that, Hagen Smith was a unicorn, so you're not going to be able to replicate the success that he had. But I think overall, if you look at Arkansas starting rotation, it's as good, if not better, but we'll just call it a wash, okay? You're not going to replace Hagen Smith, but you're going to probably get more out of your number 2 and number 3 than you got from Tiger and Molina, which, again, we expected them to be pretty good. So I don't want to just overlook that aspect and just make this a full sunshine pumping of looking at the numbers and projecting and just assuming all these guys are going to be awesome. But I think when we're talking about the bullpen, the first place we got to start, weirdly enough, is with the freshmen. Because last year, Arkansas's top bullpen guy was Gabe Gackle, who, again, is moving to that starting rotation. So Gackle goes 42 innings last year, 2.32 ERA, 57 strikeouts, 19 walks. threw a ton of strikes, bunch of 2-3 inning saves. I mean, it was a huge factor for Arkansas literally every single weekend. They threw him into every single high leverage situation you could imagine. And he always came through. He was unbelievable. Got to be one of the best freshman pitchers we've ever seen at the University of Arkansas, frankly. So Arkansas has a big hole to replace in their closing spot. Now, this is where it gets a little weird because with starting rotation, it's pretty easy to kind of put that in your brain of like, okay, this is the number one, number two, number three. With the closer, it's going to be a little bit closer by committee, which it was last year, frankly. Like there were multiple guys that served in that role and finished games for Arkansas. But if we're just going to stick with the freshmen, stick with Gackle, 2025, you have Carson Wiggins and Cole Gibler. Now, Cole Gibler, I think, is going to have a good chance to be the midweek starter. He's more of a starter type, throws 3 pitches already, more in that 92, 94 from the left side. So like plenty of stuff. But he's more of a like true, well-rounded pitcher rather than like a just flamethrower who you come out of the bullpen and throw, make him throw 1-2 innings. So we'll see how they decide to use him. But Carson Wiggins does kind of fit that mold of a closer, the type of guy you think of when the 9th inning rolls around, 98, 99. I mean, he touched 101 at the Fall Classic, was shoving it up against Oklahoma State. I expect Carson Wiggins is going to be closing some games for Arkansas. The good news for him and the good news for you guys also, it's not going to be all him. I mean, you've got Christian Fauch, who we'll touch on later. You got Gage Wood, who we'll touch on a little bit. You've got plenty of other guys. I mean, even Will McIntyre, another one we're going to talk about, guys that can fill that role. So it's not like Arkansas is just going to put the ball in Carson Wiggins' hand and be like, hey, go be the guy. You got to carry us here. I think he's going to have plenty of help, and that's how it should be. And, I mentioned Gackle through 42 2/3 innings. I actually don't think Arkansas is going to have a freshman throw that many innings unless it's Gibler, who just throws 4 and 5 innings every midweek game. I don't think if we're talking high leverage weekend innings, I don't think Carson Wiggins is going to be asked to throw that much, frankly. And so you got to feel pretty good about it. And look, again, going into last year, we had no expectation for Gabe Gackle. I mean, we had expectation. We thought he'd be good. First ever guest on the Bombastic podcast, but there was no rhymer. There was no precedent set in place, just like there's no precedent set in place for Carson Wiggins or Cole Gibler, who are freshmen. I mean, unless you want to really dive into their high school stats. And so, look, this is a little bit tough because it's just freshmen that have a ton of talent. But from a talent perspective, from a rankings perspective, you could actually make an argument Carson Wiggins is the most talented freshman pitcher Arkansas's ever had. I mean, he really was that level of a prospect. It was that big of a surprise that he made it to campus. And it was a surprise that Gackle made it to campus as well. But I mean, Carson Wiggins was like a unanimous, like top 75, top 100 overall type of prospect. But moving on real quick. So there's the next 3 guys are 3 guys that pitched a lot for Arkansas last year, and will pitch for Arkansas this year, and also had pitched for Arkansas the year before. And I'm talking about Will McIntyre, Gage Wood, Christian Fauch. So just running through the numbers real quick. McIntyre was coming off of a 2023 season where he threw 87 innings. Now he was kind of in and out of the starting rotation, had a 5.07 ERA. He is not going to throw nearly that many innings, and he didn't throw that many innings in 2024. He threw 54 innings, had a 4.83 ERA. So mostly similar numbers, just in a smaller sample size there. And Gage Wood threw 30 innings as a freshman in 2023. If y'all remember, he spent some time as the closer and had some really awesome moments there, but was a little up and down and finished the year a little shaky, as most freshmen tend to do. He comes back last year and throws 40 1/3 innings, 4.46 ERA. His strikeouts were up, his walks were down, his hits allowed were down. He was just a much better pitcher overall, even if the ERA isn't that vastly different. And Gage Wood might be the most improved player on the entire roster. And so, I mean, you just expect him to continue that ascent. But I mean, Will McIntyre, Gage Wood, and Christian Fauch last year had a ERA under 1, which is kind of insane. He only threw 22 1/3 innings, which kind of surprised me, even though I knew that in my brain. When I was looking over the numbers today, it kind of surprised me just because we remember Christian Fauch throwing a lot, but it was a lot of times 1 inning, 4 outs, 5 outs, maybe 2 innings at the most. And so it's kind of how it worked out. He goes 22 innings last year, 20 strikeouts, less than 1 strikeout per inning, which is just not something you expect for someone that throws 100, and only 7 walks. Coming up, after that year, which I just described to you, under 1 ERA, where he closed games, was a huge piece for Arkansas. The year before, He had thrown 12 and a third innings with an 8.76 ERA, 9 strikeouts, 12 walks. Now, look, it's not that simple where you just say, oh, well, look what Christian Fauch did in 2023 and the progress he made in 2024. We should expect everyone to do that. No, but my point is, when you look at last year's pitching staff, again, I said that I thought Tigert and Molina were going to be better, but you look at some of these pieces, it's not like it was just top to bottom. You had 10 dudes that you knew you were going to be able to count on. In fact, one of the dudes you ended up counting on more than anyone was pretty bad as a freshman the year before. And so it's just kind of the way these things work out sometimes. And that's something that you're going to continue to see with some of the pieces that Arkansas brings in. For instance, like a Jake Faraday, who also, I don't even have him listed as his full stats here, but he's another guy who pitched a good bit for Arkansas last year, closed some games, was a huge factor in the back end of the bullpen. He redshirted, or pretty much redshirted the year before, had thrown 2 combined innings in his career coming into last year. And with guys that throw 97, 98, you're going to see some of that play out here and there. And Arkansas's got plenty of candidates in that regard, like a Hunter Dietz, like a Colin Fisher, who doesn't throw 100, but it's similar kind of thing of a freshman who hadn't thrown a ton that might take on a bigger role as well. Tate McGuire is another one who kind of fits that mold of someone who hadn't thrown a ton in his career, but might end up throwing more this upcoming spring. So if you really just look at it in terms of, I wrote down the top 7 guys on Arkansas's pitching staff, which again, these roles are going to change. The top 7 today might not be the top 7 tomorrow or in February or in April. But if you just look at it on paper, again, Will McIntyre, Gage Wood, Christian Fauch were all guys that were coming off of, not like stunning years at all. They all got better. You would assume they're going to continue to get better, although Christian Fauch is going to have a hard time replicating his sub-1 ERA. We'd anticipate he's going to throw more innings, have more strikeouts. Maybe we can settle on like a sub-2 ERA or something like that. But I mean, you think all 3 of those guys expected to be better. And again, a guy in Gabe Gackle, you might not be able to replicate what he did as a freshman, but you've got 2 freshmen in Wiggins and Gibbler who are very much capable. And you've got a ton of guys like a Dietz, like I mentioned, like a McGuire, and even some older guys like a Carter, Coyle, Bybee, who again, I haven't even mentioned at all here, that are all going to be able to pitch in and help. I really think when you look at it top to bottom, Arkansas's got a real chance to have a deeper pitching staff full of guys that you kind of know what to expect. Because again, like I said, going into last year, Arkansas had some guys that they penciled in for a ton of success that didn't necessarily have it, but they also wound up relying on guys to do a lot of big things for them that really hadn't played a ton in their careers leading up to it. So as good as Arkansas's pitching staff was last year, and to be clear, it's one of the 10 best in the country. I mean, they led the SEC all year in ERA, led the SEC all year in strikeouts, opposing batting average, like whatever metric you want to do, whip. Arkansas was in the top echelon of the country and in the SEC for pitching. And again, it was a pitching staff that 2 of your top pieces underachieved, and a lot of the pieces you relied on weren't super proven before. And so, look, I again, I'm going to say it for the 1,000th time. Arkansas does not have a Hagen Smith on this team. They might not ever have a Hagen Smith again. But if you just look at the pieces top to bottom, I'm talking Gackle, I'm talking Root, I'm talking Beitelscheiss, I'm talking Wiggins, I'm talking Gibbler, I'm talking McIntyre, Wood, Fauch, I'm even talking Dietz, I'm talking Bybee, all the way on down the line. And I haven't even mentioned, I know I mentioned 2 freshmen there at the top, but there's plenty of other freshmen like a Tag Andrews or like a Luke Williams who might be able to help this team out. And so really, if you're just looking top to bottom, now good, people are going to get hurt. That's just the way these things are going to play out. But again, it's hard not to be pretty optimistic that Arkansas might have a better overall pitching staff. What will that look like in terms of the numbers? We'll see. But I really think on paper, again, if you're just looking at what they've done in their careers now and what can we maybe expect moving forward, I honestly feel like Arkansas has a deeper, better overall pitching staff. And before we get out of here, we're going to talk about who we really see as the closing option for Arkansas after one more quick break. ZBiotics Pre Alcoholic Probiotic Drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink your alcohol, Alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. And so it's a pretty simple 3-step process. You drink your probiotic before you drink responsibly, you're able to enjoy tomorrow. Go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use the code lockedoncollege at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege and use that code at checkout for 15% off your order. That is ZBiotics. Okay, so everyone always wants to know, like, hey, who is the closer? And if you're a fan of the MLB, there's typically teams have a guy that is like the closer who racks up 50, 60 saves, whatever the case may be, and winds up being a huge deal for your season. I actually think Arkansas is really equipped. And look, they were this way last year, even though Gackle was that guy as the closer. Arkansas had no shortage of dudes that finished games for them. And Arkansas has no shortage of guys on this current roster who have finished games before in the past. I'll even start at the bottom here. A guy like Dylan Carter played a huge role in Arkansas's 2023 bullpen, ended up throwing like 35, 40 innings, and he wasn't expected to contribute a ton throughout the year, but a bunch of dudes went down. He ends up throwing a ton of innings, and that was before he got hurt. He comes back from injury last year, threw a little bit, but wasn't really his peak self, wasn't really in top form. He's had a pretty solid offseason. He's a guy who, like, I don't think Dave Van Horn would be sweating if he had to go put him out in the ninth inning to close out a game. Now, will that be their number one option? Of course not. But I'm just telling you, that's an older guy who's thrown a ton, who you could close games with. Parker Coyle's another guy who I remember closing out SEC games as a freshman, and he threw about 18 innings last year, didn't have the year he wanted. He's been a lot better this offseason as well. And another guy I want to talk to before I get into the top options, Hunter Dietz is kind of the X factor wild card, I feel like, of this pitching staff, because if you go back to this time last year, he was a guy that was getting all that buzz from the D1 baseballs of the world, or the Baseball Americas. He was actually rated a little bit higher than Gabe Gackle was coming out of high school in terms of, as a prospect and all that. Now, of course, I'm not saying he's going to be as good or better than Gabe Gackle, what he is going to do now that we've seen him pitch and he's got some experience. He's clearly one of the top arms in the country, but that just tells you how highly regarded Hunter Dietz was coming out of high school. And he's a guy that has not pitched yet because he's still working his way back from injury. They're actually hoping he's going to be able to throw from a mound here, over the Christmas break, maybe leading up into January. So if all goes well, he should be ready to start the season, and we'll see what kind of role he's really able to work into. Hopefully it's not a Nick Griffin situation where it just never really works out and the arm's never healthy. But even the flashes we saw last year from Hunter Dietz, I mean, he's a lefty, 95, 97, throws the hard slider. When you're that big and that talented, it's really not that hard for us to get real legitimate innings out of you at the back end. So it's like, that's a guy that if he wound up closing games for Arkansas, I certainly wouldn't be stunned. And Carson Wiggins is kind of the one that over the last 3 weeks has emerged as the obvious go-to closer, and he very well might end up being that. We really didn't see him throw a ton this fall. I think he threw 5 innings combined. I know he missed a week or two here or there, and didn't get extended in many of his outings. My only thing with the Carson Wiggins situation is, one, he's a freshman. And before anybody wants to, comment about his brother Jackson or whatever, at least the word among the scouts and among the coaching staff, frankly, is that he is a little bit more of a polished version of what Jackson was when he first came to Arkansas, which, by the way, when Jackson first came to Arkansas, you know what he was doing? Closing games, closing real games, closing SEC games. And when you throw 98, that's just kind of the thing that happens. But obviously Jackson had his ups and downs as a Razorback. So I'm sure there's a lot of fans who are going to have some reservation of are we sure we want, the younger brother here closing games? I think you do. I think he's going to be okay. Dude throws 100 as an 18-year-old. I think he'll figure it out. But my only reservation is I hope that they are not doing the Gabe Gackle thing with him where he ends up throwing 42 innings. I said that earlier. I think it's going to be a smaller workload, which it probably should be. And so I think if you have a guy in Carson Wiggins as talented as he is, and you're only asking him to throw 1, maybe 2 innings, I think you're getting him in a role he's overqualified for, and one that I think he could really thrive in. He might be the most talented player on the roster. Listen, he turned down a lot of money to come to Arkansas. I think they are going to find a legitimate role for him, and it very well could be as that, surefire closer. The question I have is, what do you do with Christian Fauch? Christian Fauch, like I said, through 22 innings last year at a sub-1 ERA, was really more in a setup role, although he also had a couple saves last year for Arkansas. I remember him coming in to a Florida game, which is a huge game for Arkansas. They end up winning that series. He comes in and throws like 100 every pitch and gets the save. Like, I totally think he makes a lot of sense. And I think, I mentioned Christian Fauch and some of these other older guys like a Carter, like a Coyle, like a McIntyre, like a whoever, where I think that gives Arkansas the luxury where they don't have to rely on Carson Wiggins to just be the savior, to be the surefire closer every day, no matter what. And I really just, what you don't want to have, because Arkansas has been in that situation where they have like a surefire closer, like Matt Cronin, Colby Suggs. Like, these are the kind of guys that come to mind. I think those are the two highest single season save marks in school history there. And look, it's certainly a luxury to have a guy like that. But remember back in the day in 2018, 2019, when Arkansas would use Matt Cronin on a Friday for 2 innings, and then you're like, okay, so now what do you do the rest of the weekend? There was a little bit of that anxiety that set in because Arkansas didn't have as deep of a pitching staff back then. I don't view that to be the case. Like, I think if Carson Wiggins comes out and throws, let's say Arkansas plays a Friday night game and Carson Wiggins comes out and throws the final 2 innings and gets the save, and even if you don't want to use him the rest of the weekend, I think you're going to look down the road and you're going to be like, all right, well, you still got Fauch. You still got Hunter Dietz available. You've still got Cole Gibbler available. You've still got, Parker Coyle, whoever, like, just go on down the line. And I think you're going to see a little bit more of a by committee type of thing rather than trying to use all these guys twice in the weekend and really asking a heavy load out of them. And I will say, the guy I haven't mentioned yet in the closing department is Gage Wood, who, again, as a freshman was closing games at Arkansas, closed some games for Arkansas last year as well. He has that type of bulldog mentality. When you see Gage Wood at his best, he's coming out there attacking dudes. He can close games, and he seems to kind of thrive in those big moments sometimes, although maybe not in his first career outing. We always make fun of him for that. DVH was taking the ball from him and all that. You know the story. But I think Gage Wood has the capability, and if he doesn't end up in that starting rotation, which, by the way, very much in play that Gage Wood is going to end up in the starting rotation. I think all 4 of those top guys, I'm not going to complain too much one way or the other. Whoever doesn't end up in that top 3, whether it's Shees or it's Gage Wood, because I think those are kind of the 2 you're looking at, whoever doesn't emerge out of that is going to be a very overqualified closing option as well. And so I really think Arkansas is going to be in a position. Everyone kind of wants to know who is the closer. I think Arkansas's got 3 or 4 legitimate options. And I know that may sound like a not good thing, but trust me, it is a good thing. You want to have all these different guys that can do it. And guys, just while I've been sitting here talking for 28 minutes straight now, just while I've been talking alone, I've been hyping myself up and getting more and more excited about this Arkansas pitching staff and kind of what they might bring to the table. And so, look, I need to wrap it up here real quick before I get over the 30-minute mark, because they get upset at you for that. But before I get out of here, I do want to just say I have plans for the Bombastic podcast moving forward. Obviously, we're going to continue to crank out these awesome little episodes here on Locked On. But throughout the season, as we get closer to it, I'm going to kind of open up a mailbag, and feel free to just comment on this video below or tweet at me, whatever the case may be. You can just find me wherever, because I want to do some type of daily, similar to what Curtis has been doing on our Inside Arkansas YouTube page, a daily 8 to 12 minute video breaking down one specific topic. Like, for instance, I could have just taken this closer conversation, crammed that into 10 minutes and put that out as a video. But as we lead up to the season, getting around Christmas time, I want to start ramping up daily little subject videos to contribute to the YouTube channel we have over there at Inside Arkansas, and just to talk baseball with you guys, because we're going to continue to get closer to the season. That excitement's going to ramp up, and then the team will be back for scrimmages in mid-January before we know it, and we're off and running. And so I don't want you guys to be, forgetting, missing out on your baseball content. So just hit me up, comment on this video below, or tweet at me. Whatever you want to hear me talk about, I will talk about. I promise you that. And before the season kicks off in February, or pitches off in February, we will have covered it all. So I appreciate you guys for joining me on another edition of the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, the Bombastic edition. I will see you folks later.